A crowbar bit into the wood beneath the old cash register. It groaned once, then cracked. A panel splintered loose and dropped to the floor. Two hands reached into the dark gap behind it. They came back holding a rusted coffee tin, dented on one side, the lid sealed shut with age. The hands were shaking, not from the cold, from the weight of what it meant. Because a tin that heavy is never just a tin. The woman holding it was 70 years old. Her name was Eleanor Pruitt. 2 days before, she had signed away a marriage of 40 years. She thought she had nothing left to lose. She was wrong. Her father hid this tin before he died, and he never said a word about it. What was inside would rewrite every year she believed she had wasted. So what did he hide? Stay right with me. Let me back up. 2 days earlier, Eleanor sat in a lawyer's office in El Paso and signed her name 11 times. 11, she counted. Each signature ended a little more of the life she'd known. When the last page was done, the lawyer slid a box of tissues across the desk. She didn't touch it. She picked up her purse, said thank you, and walked out. 40 years of marriage, gone in the time it takes to fill out a form. Raymond didn't even come. He sent his attorney. That told her everything she needed to know about the last 40 years, though truth be told, she'd known it for a while. She got in her father's old truck, the one thing nobody fought her for, and she drove. Not home. She didn't have a home anymore. She'd given him the house to make it quick, to make it clean. She drove southeast, out past the towns that dry up and blow away, toward Marfa, where the highway runs straight and the sky sits low and heavy. She drove because there was one place left in the world with her name on the deed, a place she hadn't set foot in for 9 years. The Blue Sparrow Diner. Her father, Walter Pruitt, ran that diner for 40 years. He died when Eleanor was 61, and she'd let it sit ever since, boarded up, paying the little bit of tax on it every January and never once asking herself why she bothered. Now she knew why, because some part of her always figured she'd need somewhere to run to. And here she was. The Blue Sparrow sat alone off the highway, a low building with a busted sign and windows covered in plywood. She pulled up in a cloud of dust and looked at it a long minute. Then she got out. The key still worked. Her father never changed a lock in his life. The door swung open and the smell of old grease and dust rolled out to meet her. Everything was exactly where he'd left it. The stools, the coffee pots, the little chalkboard where he wrote the pie of the day. 9 years and nobody had moved a thing. Now here's where the cat comes in. As she stood in that doorway, something brushed against her ankle. She jumped near out of her skin. It was a tabby, thin as a rail, gray and orange, with one eye gone and the socket sewn shut by nature or by fighting. It looked up at her like it had been waiting 9 years for someone to open that door. She should have shooed it off. Instead, she said out loud, "Well, you're a mess." And the cat walked right past her into the diner like it owned the place. She named him Domino before she'd even decided to keep him. Some decisions make themselves. That first night she slept in the back booth under her coat. In the morning she started to work. She pried the plywood off the windows and let the light in. She hauled 40 garbage bags of trash out to the truck. She scrubbed the counters with her bare hands until her knuckles bled, and she didn't stop. Because here's the thing about a woman who just lost everything. Work is the only thing that keeps the crying at bay. Every counter she cleaned was a year she was trying to wash off. She told herself she was going to reopen it, serve coffee and eggs to truckers and tourists coming to see the strange lights out on the plane. It was a foolish idea for a woman her age with maybe $11,000 to her name. She knew that. But foolish was all she had left, and foolish was better than empty. Raymond used to tell her she couldn't run a lemonade stand. He said a lot of things over 40 years, and most of them stuck to her like burrs. Reopening that diner was, in some quiet way, the first thing she'd done for herself since she was a girl, and she was terrified. By the third day, the place almost looked alive. She had the grill working. She had a fresh pot of coffee going, mostly to prove to herself she could. Domino sat on the counter watching her like a foreman. She poured herself a cup and let herself feel for 1 second something close to hope. And that's exactly when she noticed it. The old cash register, the heavy iron kind, sat crooked on its shelf. When she went to level it, her hand pressed the wood panel beneath it. And the panel gave. Just a little. Just enough to make her wonder what her father was hiding under his own register for 40 years. She could have left it. A wiser woman might have. But you already know she didn't. Eleanor got the crowbar from the truck. Her father's crowbar, worn smooth at the grip by his hands. She fitted under the edge of that loose panel and she pulled. The wood fought her, then let go all at once. And there in the dark space sat a coffee tin, rusted and dented, heavy as a brick. She lifted it out with both hands. Something inside shifted and slid. Paper, a lot of paper. Her name was scratched into the lid with a nail. Eleanor, just that. Her name in her father's hand, waiting 9 years for her to find it. She sat down right there on the floor. The lid didn't want to come. She worked at it with her thumbs until the rust cracked and it popped free, and the smell of old paper came up at her and she looked inside. Letters. Dozens of them, folded and yellowed and bound with twine. A stack of small ledger books with marbled covers, and underneath it all a bank book. A savings passbook, green, soft at the corners from handling. She lifted it out first and opened it, and the name printed on the first line was her own. Eleanor Marie Pruitt, her maiden name, an account she had never opened, an account she had never known existed. She turned the pages with a hand that would not stay still. Deposits, line after line of them, small ones, $10, $15, $20. One a month, sometimes two. She flipped to the first page. The first deposit was dated the year she turned 6. The last was dated 3 weeks before her father died. 55 years of little deposits, made by a man who never once mentioned he was making them. She didn't understand yet. She just knew her chest hurt in a way it hadn't in years. So she set the bank book down and reached for the letters. She untied the twine. The top letter was addressed to her in the same hand as the lid. "My Eleanor," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you finally found the panel. I always figured you would. You were the curious one." And she had to stop and breathe because it was her father's voice, plain as day, coming up off the page 9 years after they put him in the ground. "I need to tell you something I never had the nerve to say to your face," he wrote. "This diner is not what you think it is. It never was. You always looked at it like it was the thing that kept me from you, all those hours I worked, all those nights I wasn't home. You weren't wrong to feel that way, but you were wrong about why. So let me tell you the truth, now that I can't see your face when you hear it." And then he told her. The winter Eleanor was 5, her mother took sick. It wasn't the kind of sick you shake off. It was the long kind, the expensive kind, the kind that eats a family alive from the inside. There was no insurance worth the name in those years, not for people like them. The hospital in El Paso wanted money they didn't have and never would. Her father sat at that very counter one night and did the arithmetic and understood that his wife was going to die at home in the dark because he was poor. That was the whole of it. Poor. There was a man in the county named Silas Vance. Vance had money and Vance lent it, and Vance was not a kind man about it. Everybody knew what it meant to borrow from Silas Vance. But Walter Pruitt had a dying wife and a little girl, and a man will walk into any fire for that. So he went to Vance, hat in his hands, and he borrowed more money than he ever thought he'd see in his life. Vance gave it to him, and Vance set the terms. The diner as collateral, the full amount plus interest that was cruel. And a handshake that Walter understood was really a noose. Her mother lived. That's the part that mattered. The money bought 3 more years, and Eleanor got to know her mother's face and voice because a desperate man signed away his life to a hard one. But when her mother finally passed, the debt didn't go in the ground with her. It sat there. It grew. And Walter Pruitt spent the next 40 years at that grill paying Silas Vance back, dime by dime, plate by plate, because if he ever missed, Vance would take the diner and the roof over his daughter's head along with it. "That is why I was never home," he wrote. "Every egg I ever cooked, every cup of coffee I ever poured, I was buying back our lives one nickel at a time. I never told you because I didn't want you to grow up feeling like you cost something. You didn't cost me anything, Alina. You were the reason. There's a difference and I need you to know it." Alina read it twice, then a third time. Domino had climbed into her lap and she was stroking him without knowing she was doing it. All those years she'd spent angry at her father. All those years she'd thought he loved that diner more than he loved her. And it turned out the diner was the love. It was the whole shape of it. She'd just been looking at the back of it her whole life. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and made herself get up. She put the letters back in the tin, gently, the way you'd handle something living. She set the bank book on the counter. And you know what she felt, sitting in that quiet diner in the last of the daylight? Peace. The first real peace she'd felt in years. She understood him now. She'd made it in time to understand him. She poured herself a fresh cup of coffee and sat down on a stool and let her shoulders come down from around her ears for the first time since El Paso. The storm was over. She thought she'd found the whole story. She thought all that was left was to grieve and to heal and to open a little diner and grow old in peace. She was wrong about that too. Because right then, as the sun went flat and orange along the highway, 3 hard knocks landed on the glass of the front door. And a man's voice called through it, flat and easy, the voice of a man who is used to getting what he wants. "Miss Pruitt, Alina Pruitt, I think you and I need to talk about who really owns this building." Alina stood up so fast the stool spun behind her. The man on the other side of the glass was maybe 50, in a pressed shirt with no jacket, holding a leather folder under one arm. He smiled at her the way a man smiles when he already knows how the conversation ends. She unlocked the door because she didn't know what else to do, and he stepped in like he'd been invited. "Name's Curtis Vance," he said and put out his hand. She didn't take it. She'd read that name 20 minutes ago. Vance. He saw the recognition on her face and his smile got a shade colder. "I see the name means something to you. Good. That saves time." He set the leather folder on the counter, right next to the tin, and opened it. Inside was a document, old and official, with a raised seal and her father's signature at the bottom. And a second signature beside it, Silas Vance. "My grandfather," Curtis said, tapping the name. "This is a promissory note secured against this property. Your father borrowed against the Blue Sparrow in 1962 and pledged the land and the building as collateral. That note was never marked satisfied, not in our records, not in the counties, and I've spent 2 years buying up every parcel along this stretch of highway. This is the last one I need." He slid a printed offer across the counter. "I'm prepared to be generous given the family history, but make no mistake. If that note is still open, this building is mine, not yours, and I have paper that says so." And that's where the whole thing changed. Because 10 minutes ago this was Alina's story, a woman and her father and a tin full of grief. Now it was Silas Vance's grandson standing in her father's diner with a 50-year-old noose in a leather folder, telling her the debt her father died paying might not have died with him. This wasn't about her marriage anymore. It wasn't even about her father's memory. This was about whether she got to keep the one thing in the world that was still hers, and about a man with lawyers and money who had already decided she wouldn't. She looked at the offer. The number on it was more money than she'd ever held. For half a second, God forgive her, she thought about it. She was 70 years old with $11,000 and a bad hip. Take the check, drive away, let it be somebody else's fight. Raymond's voice again in the back of her skull. "You can't run a lemonade stand." And that voice is exactly what made up her mind. because she was done being told what she couldn't do by men who never once asked her what she could. "No," she said, "just that." Curtis Vance sighed like a patient man dealing with a slow child. "Miss Prewitt, you don't seem to understand the position you're in. That note gives me the right to foreclose. You want to fight that, you'll need lawyers you can't afford over a debt your daddy owed my family. I'm offering you a way to walk out of here with money in your pocket and dignity intact. Take the win." "Come back tomorrow," she said. "I'll have your answer." He studied her a moment, then closed the folder. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. After that, the offer starts going down." He walked out into the dark and got into a car that cost more than the whole building, and he drove off toward town. Eleanor locked the door behind him and leaned her back against it. Her heart was hammering. And I want to stop right here for 1 second, because if you've made it this far, if you're sitting there in your own kitchen or your own truck rooting for this woman, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Stories like Eleanor's about the people the world writes off, they don't get told unless folks like you stick around to hear them. All right, back to it. Because Eleanor Prewitt was not going to sleep that night, and neither should you. She turned around and looked at the tin, and the letters, and the ledgers. 40 years of ledgers in her father's hand, and she said out loud to the cat, to the empty room, to her father wherever he was, he kept records of everything. That man kept a receipt for a stick of gum. And her hands started moving before her mind caught up. She dumped the tin out on the counter, careful and quick, and went through those ledger books one by one. And they were exactly what she'd hoped. Payment records. Every single payment her father ever made to Silas Vance, dated, signed, and initialed. Line after line, year after year, all the way from 1962 forward. Her father hadn't just paid the debt. He'd written down every dollar of it, because a poor man who borrows from a hard man learns fast to keep proof. She read for 3 hours. She found the original amount. She found the interest. She did the sums on a napkin, her old bookkeeping from before she married coming back to her hands. And somewhere past midnight she got to the last ledger, the thinnest one, and turned to the final page. And there it was, the final payment, dated the spring before her father died, and beside it in different ink a single line in a handwriting that wasn't her father's, paid in full, Silas Vance, with a date and the old man's shaking signature. Silas Vance himself had signed off on the debt. 2 old men, at the end of both their lives, one paying the last of a 40-year sentence and the other finally letting it go. And her father had kept the proof in a coffee tin under his cash register, because he must have known that a man like Silas Vance had a grandson somewhere, and that grandsons don't always honor what their grandfathers finally found the grace to forgive. But a signed page in a ledger wasn't a legal release. Eleanor knew enough to know that. Curtis had a sealed note. She had a handwritten line. In a courtroom, his paper might beat her paper, and he had the lawyers to make sure it did. She needed more. She sat there in the dark and made herself think, and she remembered the bank book. 55 years of deposits into an account in her name. Where did an old man drowning in debt find $10 a month to squirrel away? And why did he give the account her maiden name and never tell her it was there? She read the last letter in the tin, the one at the very bottom, folded smallest, like he wanted it read last. And that letter answered everything. The account, he wrote, was her freedom. That was the word he used, freedom. Your mother made me promise something before she passed, he wrote. She made me promise you'd never be trapped the way we were. She said, Walter, don't let that girl ever stay somewhere because she can't afford to leave. So I started the account. $10 a month, even the months I couldn't spare it, even the months I skipped my own supper. I put it in your maiden name so no husband could ever touch it, no matter what the law said. It's yours alone. It was always yours alone. I meant to give it to you at your wedding. Then I saw the man you married and I decided to wait because I had a bad feeling about him. God forgive me, I waited too long and then I was gone. If you found this tin, go to the First Cattlemen's Bank in Marfa. Take the passbook. Take your ID. The money's been sitting there growing all this time. It isn't much, but it's enough to keep you from ever having to say yes to something that's really a no. That's all your mother ever wanted for you. That's all I ever wanted too. Elena put her face down on the counter and cried like she hadn't cried at the lawyer's office, like she hadn't cried at her father's funeral, like she maybe hadn't cried in her whole grown life. Because here was the cruelest part, and she felt the full weight of it right then. For 40 years she'd stayed with a cold, hard man because she believed, all the way down to her bones, that she had nowhere to go and no way to get there. And the whole entire time, there was a door standing open. Her father had built her a door. He'd spent 55 years and 1,000 skipped suppers building her a way out. And she'd suffered 40 years on the wrong side of it, never knowing it was there. She could have been so angry, at him for not telling her, at herself for not finding it sooner. But sitting there in the dark with the cat pressed warm against her side, she found she wasn't angry at all. She was found. For the first time in her life, she understood that she had been loved, hugely, quietly, without a single word of it ever spoken out loud. And a woman who knows she was loved can do just about anything. She stood up. She washed her face in the kitchen sink. And she started getting ready for 9 o'clock in the morning, because she wasn't going to lose this diner, and she wasn't going to be talked down by another man in a pressed shirt for as long as she drew breath. Curtis Vance arrived at 9 sharp. He walked in expecting a beaten woman and a signature. What he found was Elena Pruitt standing behind her father's counter with a pot of coffee and a stack of marbled ledger books squared up in front of her. She'd slept 2 hours and she looked 10 years younger for it, because there is nothing on this earth that straightens a spine like the truth. "Have you got my answer?" he said. "I've got better than an answer," she said. "I've got your grandfather's." She opened the last ledger to the final page and turned it around so he could read it. Paid in full, Silas Vance. He leaned over it. She watched his jaw work. "This is a handwritten note," he said. "It doesn't hold up. Anybody could have written that." "Read the handwriting," she said quietly. "You knew the old man. Is that his hand or isn't it?" And she saw the answer cross his face before he could hide it, because it was his grandfather's hand, the same hand that had signed the note in his leather folder, and Curtis Vance knew it. But he wasn't done. Men like that never are on the first try. "One line proves nothing about the balance," he said. "For all this shows, he wrote that on a partial payment." So she opened the other ledgers, all of them. She laid them across the counter in a row, 40 years of them, and walked him through it. Every payment, every date, the original principal, the interest his grandfather charged, which she noted out loud in a flat voice, was higher than the law allowed even then. She'd done the math on her napkin at 2 in the morning, and she gave it to him line by line, and the numbers came out exactly even to the dollar, ending on the day his grandfather signed off. 40 years of a poor man's arithmetic kept in a coffee tin, and it added up perfectly, and it left Curtis Vance with nothing to stand on. He straightened up slowly. The easy smile was gone. "You understand, my grandfather never filed the release," he said, and for the first time his voice wasn't smooth. It was tired. "Left the note open on the books. I built 2 years of plans on that note. I understand your grandfather was a hard man who did one soft thing at the end of his life," Elena said. "And I understand you almost took a 70-year-old woman's last thing on paperwork you knew in your gut was dead. So here's how it's going to go, Mr. Vance. You're going to file that release with the county. Today. And then you're going to get in your expensive car and leave my father's diner. And you're never going to knock on this glass again." The room was quiet for a long moment, and then something happened that she didn't expect. Curtis Vance sat down on one of the stools, heavy, like his legs had gone out from under him. He looked at the row of ledgers. My grandfather never talked about your father, he said. Not once. I grew up hearing Silas Vance built everything with his own 2 hands, owed nobody, carried nobody. He touched the corner of a ledger. I didn't know he carried a man for 40 years and then let him go. That's not the grandfather I was raised on. He let out a breath. Maybe he was 2 people, maybe everybody is. He stood back up, closed his leather folder, and he didn't reopen it. I'll file the release this afternoon, he said. You'll have it in writing by end of week. He walked to the door, then stopped with his hand on the glass and looked back at her. He beat me fair, your father, from inside a coffee tin, 9 years dead. I hope you know that's a rare thing. And then Curtis Vance walked out, and this time when his car pulled away, it didn't feel like a threat leaving. It felt like a weight. Alina stood alone in the diner. She'd won, she'd actually won. She looked down at the ledgers, at her father's 40 years of small, brave handwriting, and she said, "We did it, Daddy." And Domino jumped up on the counter and knocked over the coffee, and she laughed, out loud, alone, for the first time in longer than she could remember. That afternoon she drove into Marfa, to the First Cattlemen's Bank, with the green passbook and her driver's license in her purse. The young teller took the book and frowned at it and went to get her manager. The manager was an older woman who looked at the account number a long time and then looked at Alina a longer time. "This account's been dormant for 9 years, she said softly, "but it was never closed. Somebody funded it faithfully for over 50 years, and it's been earning the whole time." She wrote a number on a slip of paper and slid it across the desk, the same way the lawyer had slid the tissues, and this time Alina picked it up. "She won't tell me the number and I won't guess at it for you, but I'll tell you this. It was enough. Enough that a 70-year-old woman with a bad hip and a one-eyed cat would never again have to say yes to something that was really a no. Enough to fix the roof and the grill and the busted sign. Enough to keep the Blue Sparrow's doors open for whatever years she had left. Her father had measured it exactly. Not a fortune, just freedom, funded $10 at a time by a man skipping his supper. The Blue Sparrow Diner reopened that fall. Alina did it herself mostly, with a boy from town she hired to help with the heavy work. She painted the sign blue again and got the little sparrow repainted on it, and the day she flipped the switch and it lit up over the highway, she stood in the parking lot in the dark and cried again, but they were the good kind now. She served coffee and eggs and pie, and the pie of the day went back up on her father's chalkboard in her own hand. Truckers came. Tourists came, on their way to see the strange lights out on the plain, and half the time they told her the pie was the strangest, best thing they saw all trip. Domino got fat and took to sleeping in the front window where the sun came in, and became, near as anybody could tell, the most photographed cat in West Texas. She framed one of her father's letters and hung it by the register, not the private one. The first one, the one that started my Alina. She hung it where she could see it while she worked, and sometimes on a slow afternoon she'd read a line of it and have to go stand in the back for a minute. Curtis Vance filed the release, like he said. And here's a thing I didn't see coming, and maybe you didn't either. About a year on, he started stopping in. Sat at the counter, ordered the pie, left too big a tip, didn't say much. I think a man who found out his grandfather was better than he'd been told needed to sit near the proof of it now and then. Alina let him. She'd learned that people are mostly 2 people, and you might as well feed the better one. She never heard from Raymond again, and she was grateful for it. She thought about him less than she'd have believed possible. When she did, it was without heat. 40 years is 40 years, and you can't get them back, and she'd stopped trying. Because here's what her father gave her in that tin, and it was worth more than the money, more than the diner, more than winning. He gave her back her own life. For 9 years, for 40 years really, she'd told herself the same sad story, that she'd wasted it. That she'd been foolish and small and trapped, and that it was mostly her own fault for not being braver. And the tin told her a different story. It told her she'd been loved the entire time by people who moved heaven and earth in silence to make sure she'd have a way out when she was finally ready to take it. She hadn't wasted anything. She'd just been waiting for the day she found the door. She's still out there, as far as I know. 70-something years old, running a roadside diner alone off the highway outside Marfa, with a fat one-eyed cat and a pot of coffee always on. If you ever drive that lonely stretch and see a little blue sparrow lit up in the dark, pull in. Order the pie. And if the gray-haired woman behind the counter seems happier than a person running a diner all by herself has any right to be, now you know why. Remember that tin at the start and the hands shaking as they lifted it out. They were shaking because she thought she was holding the last of her father. She wasn't. She was holding the first day of the rest of her own life. She just didn't know it yet. That's the thing about the truth. Sometimes it's been waiting for you the whole time, sealed up in the dark, patient as a father's love, right there under the register where you never thought to look. Eleanor Pruitt looked, and it changed how she saw every year she thought she'd thrown away. That's the whole story. Thanks for staying with me to the end of it. Drive safe out there. This now runs about 4,990 words. The hook is unchanged, 150 words. The ending is intact, and every beat survives: the divorce, the diner, domino, the tin, both letters, the false calm, Curtis Vance's arrival, the ledger showdown, the bank payoff, and the resolution. The cuts came from trimming doubled phrasings and a few redundant sensory lines in the setup and middle.